I think most of you know that ITSM Academy is a full service provider of IT service management and DevOps related education. And we are really excited that we have coming soon lean offerings, and that includes value stream mapping education. And so we thought we would take advantage of that fact and bring Mike in and have him answer some questions for us about lean. If you're not familiar with Mike, he's a consultant and a coach, and he's very passionate about continuous improvement, and we share a trait. He, like I, is a lifelong learner, and so he, his expertise is not only in lean, but certainly in agile and IT service management and how we bring all of those pieces together. He's an author and the recipient of the Shingo Prize for his contribution to the body of knowledge in terms of how to apply lean and how to continuously improve within organizations. So again, Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. Sure. We appreciate it. Mike and I, Mike's book is, and let me say, heavily highlighted. A copy of Mike's book, Lean IT, has been sitting on my bookshelf for a lot of years, but we finally had the opportunity to meet earlier this year at the Fusion Conference, and we kind of hatched the idea of doing this webinar. So we're excited.
Yes.
So what we're going to do is, as Lisa said, I'm going to ask, and not to have it be all about me, but I'm going to go first. So I'm going to ask a handful of questions, and really what we want to do is really just set the stage in terms of the topic for today's webinar being lean as the greater concept, and then specifically value streams and value stream mapping. So I'm going to ask a handful of questions, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys. So get your questions ready. Anywhere along the way, if you have a question, chat it in. We've got folks in the background who are going to be collecting the questions, so that once we get to that kind of free-form section, we'll have some questions stacked up. So here we go. So lean as a philosophy, as a way of thinking and working, the term lean was coined in the 1980s, but its roots are really much deeper, going back to the early 1900s, to the work being done by manufacturing companies like Ford and Toyota, and certainly the great work that was done by folks like Deming and Duran and Ishikawa. Here's my question for you, Mike Orzen. What took IT so long? You wrote your book in 2010. I assume that a couple of years before that you were doing your research, but why did it take IT so long to understand?
Well, to understand lean and try to apply it.
Correct.
Well, I think that's a great question. What I found, I had been working beginning in lean manufacturing and then moved into the front office, and had always been kind of an IT nerd. And I had a company say, hey, can we apply everything you're doing in lean in the rest of the enterprise in IT? And I said, sure, we can. And I had no idea exactly how we were going to do it. But I thought, well, these principles are universal, so sure, we can apply it. And time and time again, what I discovered is organizations had not considered applying lean and continuous improvement to IT for one primary reason. They would say, IT is too busy. We've got a 3-year backlog of projects. We're heads down getting work done, and we don't want to disturb them. We don't want to bother them. And I said, help me understand here. Are you saying that there's opportunity to improve IT and to create better value flow and remove waste and control variation, but you don't want to stop long enough to fix the problems? Mm-hmm. And they said that's primarily it. And I actually encountered this in dozens of organizations where that was the primary answer. The secondary answer that came up a lot was, well, IT is not like the shop floor. On the shop floor, I can see the work in process. I can see the machine that's not working. I can see the idle worker on the line, the laborer on the line with nothing to do. Where in IT, I can't really see that work in process. I can't really see the backlog. Now, roll the tape forward. Obviously, we have applied visual management, for example, and team stand-ups and technology for that matter to make the work much more visible. But not long ago, we're talking 15, even 10 years ago, that was the paradigm. That was the model that people were buying into. The work's invisible, and these people are under so much pressure. The last thing we want to do is disturb them with any kind of attempt to make things better, which is kind of crazy, but
Right.
that's what was out there.
And it's interesting because when you talk about this idea that we're too busy, we know that very often we're too busy with wasteful activities, right? We know this is
Yes,
why we have concepts like technical debt and cultural
exactly.
debt, right? Because
Yep.
we always want to forsake improvement in order to create new.
Yeah, and to get the rush of the immediate moment of getting something done. And there is a pleasure in, quote, checking something off and saying I got it done. But often we're working on the urgent and really turning our backs on what's most important, or improving things at a more systemic level that could pay dividends for months or years to to today's fire or today's incident. And to move out of that pit of just kind of being, it's not an easy thing for most people. It's psychologically, it can be a real challenge. And I
Mhm.
think IT has that hair on fire environment, at least many IT shops do. And we've been conditioned over decades to react that way, to be responsive. So we treat everything uh, as super urgent, and we got to get to it. And that habit needs to be broken if you have any chance of really getting the benefits from lean, agile, or DevOps.
I, and I want to go back to a word that you just introduced. You introduced the concept of thinking at a systemic level. So I think that that's an important point, that we see everything as urgent, and we see everything through our particular lens, right? We know within IT, we've been talking for a while about this idea that there's silos within IT, and within each silo, they're thinking about what they're doing, whether it's handling an incident or developing some new software, and they're not necessarily thinking about what's happening in other parts of the organization. And so we end up with this idea of sub or local optimization.
So
So,
true.
right. So part of what lean thinking does is challenge organizations to break down those silos and think about things from the concept of value streams. So Mike, can you talk a little bit about value streams and why it's important that we think at that value stream level?
Sure. So first of all, when we think about value streams, of course, we need to understand value, and we need to understand value from two primary perspectives. Value from the customer's perspective, that's the person or people or group that is actually paying money, either directly or indirectly, for the services that are coming from IT. And we need to understand what they truly value and their prioritization of those elements of value. Secondly, we need to understand what users of the system value in terms of what they need to get their work done. They may not be directly paying for the service, but they certainly have a definition of value. So we need to understand value from both perspectives. The value stream is everything that we do, good, bad, or ugly, to deliver that information, that functionality, that service to both our users and our external paying customers. And the reason it's so important is it's much easier and much more comfortable for us to look at something on our desk and say, well, if I'm going to make improvement, I'll make it here because I can control this or I can influence this. I understand this. But improvements that can be felt by the customer, that can actually flow all the way through the value stream, require collaboration, coordination, and transparency between silos. If you think about it, IT is one of the most siloed organizations in any enterprise, and it's not because they're doing something wrong. It's because IT relies deeply on specialization.
Mm-hmm.
So that specialization naturally creates different groups with different focuses. And the ability for us to not abandon the silos, but coordinate the silos in such a way that value really does flow without unnecessary delays, without unplanned work, without rework, without introducing additional technical debt. To do that is not something that is clear or straightforward. So I think a lot of people in the back of their mind know this is super important, but often they say, I just don't see how to get there. I can barely get my team to coordinate with the team next door, sitting
Right.
right next door, let alone having my infrastructure group work with my security group, or having different development teams coordinate their efforts, or having the help desk and problem management people or resources get along. That is extremely challenging, and that really is what we mean by managing at the value stream level.
Right. Awesome. And I want to, I flipped over to the next slide because a lot of our audience is, involved in IT service management and has been involved in process improvement. So I wanted to show and illustrate that there is very much a relationship between value streams and processes. So value stream by definition is that sequence of activities where we design and produce and provide a specific good or service, and we would add on to the end of that is of value to our customer. And value streams typically span multiple processes. So an example I would give for our IT service management community is we know that in the course of handling, some type of a user call to the service desk, we might handle that initially as an incident. We might go leverage information from knowledge management in order to see if this is a known error. We might have to make a change in order to achieve some type of permanent resolution for that particular incident. So Mike, can you just elaborate as well about this relationship between value streams and processes and how they interact with each other?
Sure. A good way to think about it is processes, and it's almost it is kind of illustrated here. Processes are almost the elements or the building blocks of a value stream. So a value stream is, I like to say, a high level, artificially linear and artificially simplistic view of how work flows. And it's intentionally so. And at first, when people learn value stream mapping and get into the details of how powerful it is, there's a lot of natural resistance to it. Don't we need to go into more detail? And
Mm-hmm.
often they have much more experience and much more comfort going down to a process level. So don't I need to capture my inputs, my transformation, my outputs at a how the work gets done level? So when I think of how the work gets done, I think of a process. When I think of the customer experience and how value flows from concept to delivery, I think of a value stream. And do you need to understand both? Of course I do. But often what we do is our default is to go to the process level or the even deeper into the sub process and task level. And that gets us way too close to the weeds. Now, if I'm doing some kind of detailed problem analysis, of course I'm going to be at the process level and the task level. And I'm looking at the sequencing and what's happening step by step. But at the value stream level, I'm standing back and I'm saying, if I could tape myself to a call to the help desk and look at the life cycle of that call, whether it becomes an incident or it gets escalated, or if there's a reference to a KB and all of a sudden we can resolve it on a first call. What is the customer experience? And if I can kind of tape myself to that call, I see it go through various process. At that high level, that process is the value stream. What I'm looking for is when work stops. What I'm looking for is when work goes backwards. So I think the best example of this is a river. I believe that's why it's called a value stream. A river flows typically in one direction unless there's blockage in the river, like a dam or a rock. So often organizations have dams and rocks and blockages in their value stream. Probably the most common example is interruptions. So work doesn't flow if people get interrupted. Work doesn't flow if they're grappling with unplanned work. Work doesn't flow if I hurry up and do my work, but it just goes into someone else's inbox and sits there for a couple of days before it gets work done. So really one of the great gifts of lean is this concept of continuous flow. Just like we talk about continuous service improvement, we need to wrap our heads around this idea that the goal ultimately is that work in a perfect environment would have everything it needs exactly when it needs it to move forward, and to never dally, never delay, never get stuck, never get put on hold. Now, we know that's not realistic on many levels, but that's the goal. And it's amazing if we even can move 10, 20% towards that goal, what that does in terms of value to the customer, productivity of our IT resources, and our ability to deliver on our promises.
So I brought up an image of a value stream. A lot of us are familiar with how to do process mapping, right? And
yes,
typical representation of that is a flow chart, right? So if we can kind of visualize a flow chart and that sequence of activities and the decision making, we look at value streams slightly differently. So you can see here, and Mike kind of talked about this, of like pulling back a little bit and looking at things from more of a macro level, and trying to view things from the customer perspective. So Mike, can you talk about these components of our value stream, this idea that it's about the flow of information and materials and data, and also the timeline, because I think we're always interested in how then do we measure this?
Sure. Well, first of all, you can see that top center of our value stream map is always, and always should be, the customer. And our value stream map is really beginning right here. So what is I call it the trigger. There's something that starts the value stream flowing. So it's a customer request, it's a service outage, it's a request for information, could be anything at all. But we need to identify that. We also need to understand the size or frequency of that request. Do we get 500 a day? Do we get 3 a month? So we need kind of the nature of that request. So information flow is one of the key flows that we track in any value stream. But in IT, it's particularly important because that really is, in most cases, our material. So information flow is one, and the other one is material flow. So those are the two primary flows. I've also done value stream maps where we're looking at cash flow because it's particularly important. But in IT, we could have material flows if we were talking about, say, a report or some kind of functionality or something. But in the end, it's really all information. Now, when you move down to the activities that you see going from left to right, that's where we see the material, the data, and the information flowing across. And this is where we want to identify the activities again at a very, very high level. So at the top, we might have a customer initiates call. And activity one is help desk triage, receives the call and does initial triage. Activity two is help desk escalates the call if necessary. So it's at that level. And you're thinking, well, how is that helpful? Well, the reason it's so helpful is because at each of these levels, at each of these activities, we're asking ourselves, what percentage of the time do we do the work correctly? When I say correctly, I mean complete and accurate in its entirety. So if I get 10 calls and 8 of those calls I do triage accurately and there's no missing information, I've asked the right questions, we don't have to go back to the customer and say, sorry, we didn't do that right, we didn't ask that question, we didn't gather that data, I didn't cover that point. If 8 out of 10 are good and I do them correctly, then of course my percent complete and accurate is 80%. Then,
and Mike,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I interject?
Yes.
Just, I think it's important to understand this percent complete and accurate is the perception of the party that's downstream, right?
Very true. Yeah.
And
And
we know what this looks like in IT. We see it all the time where the service desk escalates something and a tier 2 support group says, well, hey, you didn't get this information, or you didn't ask this question, which would have allowed you to more accurately diagnose. So it's
exactly. And now I love that, Donna, because really what you're touching on is the fact that so we need this communication and this collaboration. Often what I see is tier 2, in some cases they say, I'm not going to take the time to tell the help desk or the service desk that they didn't get the data or they didn't do something accurately. I'm just going to fix it myself. I'm going to either call the customer, I'm going to make an assumption, I'll look it up myself. So sometimes one silo doesn't even know that their performance is less than 100% complete and accurate because there's no feedback loop.
So we're just super tolerant of waste.
We are.
Right?
We are. And it's funny because this is predominant in IT, but it's really everywhere. I've seen it in every group. I've worked in lean manufacturing. I've worked a lot in banking and insurance. I've seen it in aerospace, even food and beverage. It doesn't matter. What happens is waste has a way of becoming the work. And what I mean by that is if it's waste that I see and that I know I've got to fix, and I feel that it's easier for me just to get it done, then it isn't identified as waste by anybody. And after a while, and it doesn't take long at all, the work includes the adjustment and the correction of waste. And it just becomes the work. And because a lot of work really isn't documented or standardized, it just blends with the work. So if you said, well, what part of this work is actually value added and what part of it is kind of cleanup that you're doing from a previous activity? A lot of people say, I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I've always done it this way. Mm-hmm. So I've seen this so many times where the work that we're doing, we think it's value added, but a lot of it is actually not value added, but it's been embedded into what we do. And after we do something for a while, it becomes automatic and it's a habit. So the work literally, or the waste literally becomes invisible to us, and we fix it and we move it forward, and we feel good about our job. And it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong, but we've lost the visibility and the opportunity to reduce that non-value added work, and in so doing, improve the flow of the value stream.
And I think that's where the fact that when we're looking at, when we're creating a value stream map, when we're doing value stream mapping, the fact that we look at these time-based measures. So, processing time is going to include, how long does it take us to do that work? And that includes that wasteful, right, rework that we're doing. Or lead time is going to look at not only the processing time, but how much time is it sitting and waiting in a queue, or in somebody's email box, like you said, waiting for somebody to kind of pick it up and start working on it. And I think very often when you start to baseline these time-based measures, it's a real eye-opener for people, isn't it? To really,
Yeah, it is. I was with an IT group just last week, and this is a IT group responsible for an entire city, and we looked at basically the intake process of a project, and its a definition, and getting it all the way to the kickoff meeting. And we took this basically from concept all the way through to kickoff. And what this team discovered was, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. We had, I believe it was about 8 or 9 hours of work, but we had, what was it? I think 19 days. Yeah, that was the number. It was 19 days that it was taking to get there. But we looked at it and we saw about 15 hours of work. And I'm not even sure if 15 hours was correct. It seemed like that might have been high. But the eyes in the room were the people were blown away. And when we reported this out to the management team and saw the work that the team had done and the mapping they had done, people said, that does feel about right. And they had examples and they talked about it. But without a map and without that collaboration and without that experience, it just wasn't visible. Now, of course, the next step and the most valuable step is to make improvements so we can measure and reduce the time it's taking to deliver that value.
so value stream mapping is a technique, and Mike mentioned the team. And with value stream mapping, hopefully it makes sense to everybody. We need to bring together a cross-functional team, because part of what we want to do is break down those silos, right? And part of that just comes through that communication and collaboration and that understanding and empathy for what's happening from the beginning to the end of this value stream, and just making that all visible and finding where are those places where there's waste and questioning why is there that waste. So Mike, I'm going to ask 2 last questions and then we're going to turn it over to our collective team here. So, and I think you spoke to this a little bit, but what I see is that there's often a hesitation to go through the effort to do the current state map. People tend to say, like, look, we know where our waste is, we know where our problem areas are, so let's go ahead and jump straight to the future state map.
Yep.
And then also understanding, and you and I actually had a conversation about this the other day, that understanding that this idea of future state in the context of value stream isn't necessarily just an incremental improvement. It's transformational. The goal is to envision, right, what this really could look like, and then understand that there's lots of continuous improvement that is going to happen to get there. So
yes, and so yeah, many teams say, look, we know that things are broken, or we don't really have a well-defined process right now, so why don't we just go build the future state? And this is a big mistake on many levels. What we want to do is go through the experience to identify what it is we actually do today, not what we say we do today, but what we do today. And I want to identify those high-level activities, where the bottlenecks are, where the confusion is, and where the pain points are. And in so doing, a couple of things are accomplished. First of all, someone once said, if you don't know where you are, then you can't really know where you're going. So I kind of, if I have a map, but I don't know where I am on that map, how useful is the map? I don't know if I'm in the north of the city or the south of the city. Somehow I've got to orient myself, or else the map isn't useful. A great exercise to do that is a current state value stream map. The other thing that happens is frequently the cross-functional team that you just mentioned, Donna, barely knows each other. They might know each other's name, they might know which department they work in, but they really have little to no experience collaborating, sharing ideas. It's a bit ironic because they're all part of the same value stream. But the reality is that's why we're here. That's why we're engaging in value stream mapping. We need this level of communication and shared understanding. So the experience of going through the creation of a current state value stream map, of identifying the pain points, and the amazing discovery, like that team just last week that said, you're kidding, it takes this many days to do 15 hours of work, is that right? And then having that aha moment and going, oh my God, it is right. And then starting to see the tremendous opportunity to make improvement. When that happens in a group setting, we have shared discovery, we have shared buy-in. And having one or two people go into a room and create the map and then try to convince everybody else that this is a good idea is a complete waste of time. Their map won't be accurate, and even if it is, now all they're doing is out there trying to convince other people. It just doesn't work. So you have to start with the current state map. The other oversight that I often see is people don't want to build a future state map. They say, okay, we've done a current state map, we've identified some pain points, now let's go out and fix some stuff. Why do we have to do a future state map? And the future state map, in a very similar way, develops a shared vision of how things could be and where they need to be. It might be tied to promises we've made to the organization. It could be tied to an SLA that we have in place. But this is where we start to develop alignment of purpose. So are we really clear? Often people are clear on the components of the value stream, but they're not necessarily aligned on the purpose of the value stream. And this is because we have localized measures that we call performance measures. But localized performance measures are not in and of themselves aligned with value stream level measures. So if I'm measuring one area of the value stream, say on volume, and another area on the value stream on outcomes, those two can be at cross odds. So these discoveries occur when we're in a room together going through this process. And usually it's a 3-day experience. Occasionally, some very complex value streams can be as much as 4 and 5 days. But as you know, trying to get a cross-functional team from IT to sit in a room for 3 days requires a major commitment from leadership. To ask for 5 days, there's got to be a lot of pain where leadership is saying, look, drastic situations require drastic measures. I'll bite the bullet. Let's do this and sit down for a full week.
Right. And I'm just going to give a nod to the facilitator role in that effort, because the facilitator is there to kind of encourage that communication, that collaboration, make sure everybody is participating and being honest about what's really happening, and participating in visualizing that future state. But at the end of the day, it's not the facilitator that needs to take ownership for what was agreed upon in that workshop. It's the folks who participated.
That's exactly right. But the facilitator, a skilled facilitator can make or a facilitator can make or break a value stream mapping session's value. Because many people, I mean, the room is full of subject matter experts in their particular area. Usually a third to a half of the room also has some lean experience and or understands agile. Those are all very positive things. But the facilitator has the ability to ask open-ended questions to get people to gradually, over that 3-day period, shift their mindset from more of a, this is my backyard and this is what I know and this is what I'm comfortable with, to, wow, it's really all about the performance of the value stream that matters. I contribute to that, but just being concerned with my piece of the value stream is not going to lead to success. So it's a little bit like realizing that you're part of a greater community, and a skilled facilitator really brings that out in a very, very subtle way. If you just gave a lecture on this, you could talk all day long, but you need the people to actually experience this and to feel it deeply within if they're going to really embrace this. Because after the mapping sessions, that's when the real work starts. That's when we're engaging in problem solving and structured experimentation.
Right. So thank you. And I hope I asked some of the questions you all would have asked, but let's Lisa, let's hear what questions our attendees have for Mike.
Okay, and thank you guys. I found that to be very interesting. Greg, I didn't know if you wanted to come off mute and ask this yourself, but you have a couple questions. I'm gonna throw one out, and if you want to come off mute and chat with them, let us know, please. So this was from pretty early on in the conversation, and Greg says it is the value of getting it right now versus, oh, I think this is more just, you're right, Greg, but it's the value of getting it right now versus the value of getting it right. And then his question is, does value stream mapping also look at errors and rework?
Absolutely, it does. So what we want to look at, I use the term pain points, and I like that because most people identify with pain points, but we talked about the percent of complete and accurate. So anything that comes back for any reason, a clarification, a completion, an omission, a correction, that is captured in percent complete and accurate. And as Donna pointed out, we typically can find the best measure of that by asking the recipients of the work, how frequently do you discover that something needs to be redone? So anytime we redo something, correct it, complete it, we capture that on the map. And one thing we didn't talk about are it's an icon. It looks like a POW symbol in a comic book, like a Superman comic book. And it's called a burst or a Kaizen burst. And this is where we capture pain points. So if somebody says, activity 1, we've got overwhelming amounts of corrections or overwhelming amounts of rework or unplanned work or outages. That's captured in the mapping process. And those Kaizen bursts start to create a picture, and I call them themes, and certain themes start to come off the page. And we start to realize you can kind of categorize these problems. And then from there, you organize your improvement plan around them.
Great. Greg, if that, because Greg kind of had a second half to that question, but I feel like you covered it. He said, or is it more of a CSI activity? So, Greg,
That's excellent. Thank you very much.
Ah, there you are. Hello.
You're welcome.
And then Jose has a question asking, IT flows have a lot of variation. Using the incident value stream map, how would you represent situations like functional escalation without some type of loop? Is functional escalation always waste/rework? Great question, Jose.
Yeah, that really is a great question. So, you know, I've done a decent amount of value stream mapping in this particular area, and I would say it's somewhat unique because ideally we want to resolve an incident as quickly as possible. So one could argue that escalating the issue is non-value added work because ideally the issue would have never have occurred. So it's a little counterintuitive. But what we do is we create 2 or 3 parallel value streams. So we show if an incident is resolved at the service desk level, its life cycle is completed. If it moves on and it has to feather out into different departments, what we like to do is show those as parallel value streams. They're staggered, but they're parallel. And the reason we do that is when you move into decision boxes and loops, you're really moving into more of a process map level of detail. Now, there's nothing wrong with going to that level of detail. The key is we don't go to that level of detail until we have clarity around the value stream. So there's no sin in using a loop, but you rarely, if ever, will see a loop on a value stream map. And again, the reason is when we're ready to go into the loops and the iterations and why this is taking what it's taking and all the interdependencies, we're really moving into towards a process level, and we're probably going to need more of a process map. So I call that zooming in. So think of each activity box in the value stream as being able to be exploded or decomposed into either a SIPOC, either more detailed value stream maps, or process maps. So that's kind of a quick question to a quick answer to a deep question, but we cover this in great detail in our value stream mapping course.
And thank you, Mike. And Jose, if you have a follow-on to that, let me know. And guys, just as a reminder, I misspoke in the beginning. I thought you were unable to unmute yourselves. You're not, but I've got someone in the background, and we're happy to let you speak directly with Mike and Donna. So for those of you that have sent questions in, if you'd like to ask it yourself, please just raise your hand for us. Lloyd has a question, kind of half a statement, half a question, which says, I've been in organizations where we've gone through value stream mapping exercises, and it sounds like we did everything wrong, LOL. Can you give an example of a value stream mapping exercise that produced, I think he's saying, that produced the best results? I'd like to bring a story about successful VSM to my management.
Sure, yeah, I've got several stories. First of all, I salute the fact and respect the fact that you identify, boy, it sounds like we did a lot of things wrong. It's not uncommon. I think people have good intentions, but what I typically see is all the energy is put into that initial mapping session, and then the half-life of the intentions evaporates about every week. So about 2 or 3 weeks after the value stream mapping session, all the clarity, all the energy, all the good intentions go out the door, and we're back to business as usual. And the value stream map, unfortunately, is out in the hallway on the wall with the Post-it notes falling off, and it kind of represents our lost hope. So
Well, it
yeah,
might
go
be
ahead.
like we're in the Kubler-Ross curve, right? We're like in shock and denial.
Yeah, there you go. That's
So the
exactly
question,
right.
right? The question becomes, do you have people that can kind of pull you out of that and pull you through that
And
curve?
yeah, you got it, and that's the key. So I was working with one IT organization, a company that we all would recognize, and what we discovered is to pull yourself through and to have the success. The value stream mapping, again, with a decent facilitator and with the right people in the room, is challenging, but certainly doable. The real secret sauce is, I always say, the secret sauce is what we do on Monday morning. So how do we keep the momentum going? How do we get the buy-in, and how do we build onto that? So what we discovered that works so well is what we call socialization. So we take the value stream map and the messages of the value stream map, and we share that with pretty much everybody in the value stream. We do that by putting the value stream map in a public place, by having a lunch and learn, by really getting it out there and asking for other people to say, yeah, I see it differently. I like this. This makes sense. But basically, we want more buy-in, more knowledge, more familiarity with what we're trying to do. That's point number one. Point number two, we need to act quickly. So we're going to take an area on the value stream that we saw that was a problem, and we need to engage in structured problem solving. Now, structured problem solving is basically lean problem solving. So anyone familiar with ITIL is familiar with the CSI problem solving structure, which is extremely similar. It's slightly different, but it works just fine. But we need an established framework and a disciplined way of actually making a change, running an experiment, and making sure it's an improvement. So if we do that, we're starting to move forward. So this particular company took a life cycle, and it was a service desk model, and they took, I think, 80% of the time out of the life cycle of an escalation. And they did that by trial and error. They ended up reorganizing the way that they brought the work in, the way they triaged it, and the way it was sent to various areas, and who got the work and how they got the work. And it didn't happen overnight. It was probably 5 months of work. Not solid 5 months, but it was 5 months of elapsed time. But the performance levels went up, the turnover in the area went down, the quality was great. They were recognized for what they had done. And so it wasn't that the value stream map by itself was some kind of magic bullet. It was really the socialization of the ideas, the structured problem solving, and the buy-in of their manager and the director that the manager reported to. They participated in the value stream mapping. They came to the report outs at the end of each day, and they really, really supported the team. So this is not easy stuff. I always say the easiest part is creating the value stream map.
Mhm.
Right,
It's like,
right.
but the hard part is doing the work.
Oh, the mental picture that you drew for me with the board with the Post-it notes falling out and lost hope, that was right dagger through my heart. So and you know, that's when you go to training, conference, anything, everyone always comes out with, you're really energized and great ideas, and part of our job is to help people use tools to continue the momentum. So yeah, I agree. And I'm just going to let Ashley Hamilton know that I'm going to take you off of mute in just a second to ask your question. But before I do, Ahmed had asked about, is there an ETA for VSM 101 will be available to the masses and by which institute. And yes, I mean, there are two, well, more than two, but specific to what Mike and Donna are talking about, there is a value stream mapping for DevOps course that's available through ITSM Academy. And it is considered a drill down for DOI. And then we also have the value stream facilitator course, which Donna and Mike are going to co-train, and it is going to teach you guys these tips and techniques, not just for leading the value stream exercise, but to keep the momentum going and lots of other great stuff. I just put a link in for that class into the chat box. If you guys would, if you guys want to check that out, please feel free. I'm personally going to be attending. I'm very, very excited about it. And so, Ashley, let's ask your question.
Hey, so I'm just new to the whole value stream mapping for DevOps, and I was just wondering, so I'm familiar with like manufacturing and service industries, value stream mapping, but are there any differences for a DevOps environment, or is it pretty much the same?
So the difference is, it's no differences in terms of the icons, but the differences are very stark when it comes to the mindset. So what we do so the course is called Value Stream Mapping for DevOps, but the concepts really are universal. So I've had people in the course say we can use this in our entire IT environment, not just in DevOps. And I said that's true, because they really are principles, and principles are universal ideas. But what we do in that course is we take a case study that's based on a real company that went from a classic waterfall environment and moved into a more responsive, flexible, agile / DevOps environment. And we use value stream mapping so the people in the class can actually go through the mapping experience. And then when we get done with the mapping experience, they can see a sample of what it looked like. No two value stream maps are identical, but people kind of need to go through the hands-on experience of what would it be. If not, it's just kind of vague, and people will say, well, I know value stream mapping, or I've read a book on value stream mapping. I'll just get in a room and do it with my team. And often it doesn't produce the results that you're looking for. You may have a map, but it's really, the map is more of a shell. Underneath that shell is the deep understanding and the buy-in and the alignment. That's the piece that's so important. And unfortunately, we can have the shell without that understanding and buy-in, and we don't know it until a few weeks or months later when we realize we haven't made improvement. The problem is, if you go back to the team again and say, well, we're going to do this again, how about some more value stream mapping? If they don't see the value and the outcomes and the improvements of the value stream mapping, they're not particularly interested, and they'll say they're too busy, and you just won't get the support or the input that you need for any kind of a quality outcome.
It kind of speaks, Mike, to the fact that it goes back to that idea that we're very tolerant of waste, and we're and we maybe use that value stream exercise as an opportunity to justify our waste, and rather than accepting the need to kind of dramatically change the way we do things and transform the way we do things. And that's hard, right? Because it might you use the word reorganize our work at some point. That word reorganize is often very uncomfortable for organizations, but that's what you have to do to have transformation.
That's true. And it's funny, I was with a group, I think it was last month, and we're value stream mapping, and every activity they said they were at 100%. And I said, and as a facilitator, you don't want to put words in people's mouths, and you obviously are not you don't want to make them uncomfortable or challenge them aggressively. But I said, now help me understand, when you say 100% complete and accurate, you're saying the work never comes back for any kind of clarification, correction, completion, none whatsoever. In other words, one and done. You do the work and you never see the work again. And they said, that's right. We just do the work. It's just done, and I said, so in other words, there's no delays in the process other than cues to start the next activity. Because sure, you give your work to the next activity, they're working on something else, it needs to wait a little while until they can get to it. Is that true? And they said, oh yeah, that's right. I said, really? Let's ask some other people. And at the report out, they shared this, and at the report out, the team explains the value stream map and their discoveries, and the facilitator plays a very quiet role at the back of the room. And the people listening to the report out had funny looks on their face like, what are you talking about? I'm constantly calling you and saying this doesn't look right. I'm getting things that are not appropriate. I'm asking why this was done in a particular way or why this looks funny. And they had almost endless examples, specific examples of work that did have to get pushed back. But everybody on that team all day long had said, nope, it's definitely 100%. I think one group said, well, maybe we're at 95%. So they were so committed to the fact that what they were doing correctly. But when we got a little deeper into it, somebody realized that what they had done is say, we actually are doing 100% of the work we're doing is correct, but part of the work we're doing is rework.
Right.
And that was the piece that they could not see. And when they finally got that, it was like this explosion in the room, and it was people's heads blowing off the top going, oh my God. Then we went back, and it was more like 50%, 40%, 30%, which is quite realistic. And it doesn't mean these are bad people, they don't care, they're not working. Really what it is a description of the current processes that we have in our value stream that support and incorporate this rework. It's just become part of the way we do the work.
So great answer. Thank you very much. I would go into analogy about having the proper tools, with your home improvement projects, but we're running tight on time. I've got one more question, which I'm going to ask on Jose's behalf. If you guys have any additional questions, shoot them in now, and we'll get answers to you later, because we're just about done. You can just use info@itsmacademy.com, and we'll be happy to answer all of them for you. And a reminder that next month's webinar is Thursday, January 17th, and it is our very own Donna Knapp talking about ITIL 4. You won't want to miss that. Last question for you guys is, Walter, I'm going to try to sneak Walter's in too. If the VSM for a process is always linear, we have multiple blocks representing the use of the incident processes, others being problem-solving activities, change activities, sourcing activities. This will lead to very narrow scope VSM, don't you think? What am I missing here?
So,
good questions.
Yeah, some very good questions. So we probably don't have time to go too deep, but I would suggest that you zoom out. In other words, don't wrap your head around those functional pieces of ITIL. In other words, zoom out a little bit. And first of all, start with this question. What is, from the customer's perspective, what is the customer experience we're trying to look at here? So see if you can define that in layman's terms, number one. Number two, ask yourself, ask yourself, what is the value that is delivered? And then number three, start to move into a kind of a definition of a value stream. And a great way to start is to say, what is the head of my value stream, or the trigger? What is it that starts this value stream? And what is the outcome of the value stream, or the end of the value stream? So when a river flows into the ocean, you might call that the end of the value stream. What does that look like for you and what you're trying to see? Because often I see a big mistake is we just jump in and we just start pulling ITIL labels, and we think those are the activities. And I would suggest they're not. I would suggest
and Mike,
they're not. Yes.
Mike, can I just say that I would just reiterate what Mike is saying. There's not a one-to-one relationship between an ITIL process and a value stream. A value stream sits at a much higher level and might actually span multiple ITIL processes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
in handling an incident, we might use information from knowledge management. We might have to make a change. So it sits at a much higher level. The processes aren't going away. So don't think you now have to take your incident management process and turn that into a value stream. What you want to do is take it up a macro level and look at what, so from when we detect an error to when we correct that error, what processes might we span in the course of that value stream? So there's not a one-to-one relationship between what we today know as our ITIL processes and value streams. Is that a fair statement, Mike? We're kind of taking it up a level.
Exactly. I think you said it a lot more clearly than I did. Thank you, Donna. Oh, and one more thing we want to share with everybody is, Donna, do you want to mention our value stream mapping facilitator course?
Right. So we are collaborating, Mike and I are collaborating on a value stream mapping facilitator course. We're going to launch the course March 20th, and it's really designed to help an individual understand how to facilitate a value stream mapping workshop. So we're not necessarily going to kind of dive into the details of value stream mapping as a practice. We will have lots of pre-class resources that will kind of help you if you're not familiar with value streams and the kind of language that goes along with that. We'll have lots of resources that help you get there. But it's really how to facilitate a workshop. So we're very excited about that course. Again, March 20th, we're launching that course, and we hope that a lot of you are interested in, if that's something you're interested in pursuing in your organization, we think it'll be a great skill set for you.
So guys, I'm going to jump in to say that it is a couple minutes after 12. So Walter's still on, and his question is a great follow-up to what you were just talking about. So I'm going to use this as the last question, but a reminder for anyone who has to go, the recording will be up on YouTube, and you can listen to Walter's question. That'll be up in the next couple of days, and there is a exit poll when you leave. Please just take a minute, fill it out. As you know, a lot of you have been doing this with us for more than 10 years. We really listen to your suggestions and bring in the topics that you're asking for. And also, people love practitioner presentations. I know there are a lot of great practitioners on this particular webinar today. So, you know, we're happy to work with you to help you put together a webinar to present and help you share your story. So, as always, if you're interested in doing that, we're here to help. And Walter's question is, how to express in the value stream map, I think he means like in the exercise of the workshop, an if situation or when the processes use other processes.
Okay, that's another really good question, and it comes up a lot. So you're really starting to touch into a process map when you're starting to use if then. However, that said, so process mapping is more of an art than a science. And I always tell my teams, it's not that you can't do something. So if I've got a team and they say we've got a key fork in the road, we have an if then fork in the road. Sometimes in a value stream map, we'll actually show at this point, it can go either here or here. And we'll have two parallel value streams. If you start to have more than one or two of those forks in the road, more than one or two of those conditionals or if-then statements, if-then else, then you really have to say, which one do we want to focus on first? So in other words, we might say, well, 70% of these issues take this particular route, or only 30% of the issues take the alternative route, but they're taking most of our time to fix. They're the biggest pain point. So if you're going to map the whole thing, the purpose is not to map the whole thing. The purpose is to gain consensus around what's working, what's not working, how do we measure it, do we have baseline, and can we use structured problem solving? So a little bit of if-then, a little bit of conditional thinking is fine if it creates clarity. But the danger is we end up creating this complex map that really deviates from the whole purpose of the value stream mapping process. And we go deep down the rabbit hole, and it doesn't really add anything for the team. So that, I guess what I'm saying is you can occasionally use some conditionals, but I'd like to use them very, very rarely because it can throw the team off and go into too much detail. You don't need that level of detail at this point in the value stream mapping process. And this is a great question because this is the art of facilitation. And if it was simple and you could just say, oh, always do it this way, and here's the icon for that, then we'd have more organizations that would have great examples of value stream mapping and value stream management success. I hope that kind of gets to your question.
It made perfect sense to me. And Walter, if you have a follow-up on that, shoot me an email. I'm gonna, or you can just put it in the chat, or again, any questions, info@ITSM Academy. We are going to close it up in an effort to be very timely, which we are not always. New Year's resolution and all. So again, when you guys are, I'm starting early. Again, when you guys exit, please take a moment to answer those poll questions for us. And Donna is way down deep into building our Title IV curriculum foundation to start, and that's what she's talking about on January 17th at 11 a.m. And we hope that you all can join us. And Mike and Donna, thank you guys so very much. I found this very, very valuable, pun intended.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
We enjoyed having you, and hope we get to have you back again in the future.
Me too. Sounds great.
Happy holidays,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks,
Happy
everybody.
holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye.